What's going on, people? In today's video we are going to be looking at the English opening for beginners. So basically, to summarize everything off, the English opening is when you play 1c4, as you can see over here. Now I have a variation already pinned out into the analysis board so we can take a look at it, and this first opening is the symmetrical version of the English opening, which is c4 and c5. Probably one of the most common responses you might get from a very low rated beginning standpoint. When you first starting off at chess, it's very common just to mirror the opponent and see what they're doing and see how they're playing and use their tactics against themselves, basically giving them a taste of their own medicine. So this is how the variation continues. They bring out both knights, knight c3, knight c6. Then we get g3, trying to fianchetto the bishop. The opponent brings out the f3 knight. The f6 knight. We fianchetto the bishop on the king's side, getting ready to bring out our other knight after playing d6, d3, mirroring the queen pawn. Then the opponent's going to fianchetto the bishop, as it is the symmetrical variation, and we bring out our knight, and then we can castle after they've fianchettoed their bishop and castle. And this is basically the start of the symmetrical variation. Now, there are several moves that we could go into from here onwards, and this is probably better for you as a beginner to see what openings look more reasonable, and then decide where you want to go with what opening. So say for example, if I liked 2 or 3 of these openings that I'm going to show you now, maybe I'd write them down, and then I'd go back into the analysis board, or maybe even go on YouTube or look for in ChessBase. You can look for some high level games that have had these lines played in them. So for example, the symmetrical English, and you can see what high level opponents are playing after this. You can also use the analysis board to see what the most common moves are and how to punish them and things like that. And you can also go online and see people play the games online with your own eyes and see how they've thought about the game and things like that. So we're not going to be doing that in this episode, unfortunately. But on to the next variation. We are going to be looking at the reverse Sicilian. So that is when you play c4 e5. Nearly stumbled over my own tongue. And this basically resembles a Sicilian, but obviously reversed. So the colours are reversed basically, and pretty similar to the other opening, but the opponent's going to bring out the opposite side knight. Then they're going to go for g3, trying to fianchetto the bishop. It's a common theme in the English to try and fianchetto your light squared bishop. It gives pressure on this pawn constantly, and then you can expand down the board later down the game, putting more pressure on this pawn. So you could go like b4, a4, a5, even a6, and if the knight takes, then I'm not sure. You get the point. The knight's probably going to be developed by that point. So it's, yeah. So for example, the opponent's just developed the knight. So we put our bishop on this square, constantly putting pressure on this pawn. Opponent brings out their bishop to the c5 square. Then we play d3, defending the main pawn in the middle. Opponent castles. We play knight f3, getting ready to castle. And then opponent playing d6 to mirror the pawns. In this aspect, the pawns are mirrored. It's like a reverse mirror. And then we castle, and we get opponents playing bishop to e6. So, and then we play bishop d2. It seems a bit contradictory, like, I'm not sure what the word would be, but it seems a bit awkward putting the queen in front of this pawn, but we also have different squares to put the bishop on further down the line. It's just a square for the opening, for the beginning, and it's going to be a main character later in the game, so don't be too worried about that. And also, I forgot to mention, the analysis bars off after these two first openings are 0.1 in favour for white, so not really a big advantage. They're just a balanced opening, you know, standard, because there's not much going on really. It looks like there's a lot going on, but there's no trades and there's no like threats. So if we look here, that's not a threat because the pawn takes. If we look here, that's not a threat because the bishop takes. This is kind of a threat, but then we just go e6. So there's not much going on, to be fair. So the evaluation's 0.1 for both them two openings. Now into the third opening, back off with the English opening, but we are getting the Anglo-Indian defense, where the opponent's going to try and bring out their bishop on the right-hand side of the board like we are. So the bishops are fighting for the diagonals. And then we obviously play d3. Quite the main setup. Opponent castles, plays d6. Going for the standard like Indian defense. Do you know what I mean? If you don't know much about the King's Indian, then this is pretty much the King's Indian against the English opening. So of course we castle, opponent plays bishop to d7, then we play bishop to d2, and that's the end of that line there. This is 0.2 in favour for white, so white's got a bit more space, and we've got a bit more of a clamp on the pawns in the centre. Just controlling a bit more squares compared to black. So if we highlight all the squares in red that white controls, and we'll do the ones in blue that white double controls. And then we'll contradict the squares with red that... I'm not even going to do this. This is a long process. But basically, white's got a bit more centre space, a bit more centre control. And that's why it's 0.2 there. So into the next opening, we are going to be looking at the Anglo-Dutch, which is the Dutch defence against the English opening, which is completely mirrored down. If we look in between the D and the E file, it's completely mirrored. So we're one square away from the centre, both throwing our flank pawns on the opposite sides of the board up for the opening. So what better moves would it be than to mirror the opponent's knights? So we're going to try and go for the basic principle of fianchettoing the bishop. Opponent brings out their c6 knight. In response to this, we of course fianchetto. That now the opponent's going to try and fianchetto behind their knight. So we just play d3, let the opponent fianchetto the knight out, getting ready to castle, realizing that the bishop's got a bit of work to do before the opponent can castle. So the opponent plays e6. We castle. The opponent plays bishop e7, getting ready to castle. We play bishop d2, and then of course the opponent would castle. Now, 5.6 for white. So this move, this opening is a bit better for white in terms of we completely own the centre. d5 is never going to be a move because we just take with the c pawn. We own the centre with our pawns, and we will eventually have centre control in the middle game. So if d5 we take with the pawn can take, but then we go d4. If this pawn takes, this pawn takes. We can move the knight out, threatening the pawn later in the game, not in that sequence because you blunder a knight. But yeah, it's pretty much white's centre. Even though it looks very, with the pawns are down here at the minute and the pawns are down here, d5's never a move because we take with the d pawn. If the knight takes back, the knight takes back, the pawn takes back, so d5's probably never a move. Anyway, on to the next opponent. We are playing the English, of course, against the Agincourt defence, which is e6 and then d5 afterwards, like a French defence. against the English. So French versus the English. So immediately you want to take this pawn. When you're offered a pawn against this c pawn, it's a flank pawn. So when this pawn is threatened at all, you want to take it immediately. So we get c takes d4, e takes d4, g3, going for the same idea of fianchettoing the bishop. And now we want to, bring our knight out, slowly build the pressure up on this pawn, and then blockade it. So we want to stop this pawn from ever moving, and we want to give white an awkward setup by making them play c6, and then we can eventually move our knight out, or we can even move our knight down to here. I forgot where the knight goes to the pawn. But anyway, once we move our knight, the bishop will also challenge the pawn because it's blocked in by the knight at the moment. So we'll have two attackers and white will only have one defender, and that will force them to play c6, which is a very ugly move. Then we can play e4, protected by the knight and the bishop, and then once the opponent takes on e4, there's a lot of lines here, but once knight, like for example, knight goes here. I could even play this out for you. So let's say, for example, black makes a knight move. Oh, in fact, if black plays knight c6, then you can go straight away e4. I'm pretty sure. Let's see what the position, which locks e4. So this is e4 or e5, and then bishop to g5. This is one more. You studied the lines. I'm just going to go with this one here so far. And that will remove this variation. Anyway, that takes us on to our next opening, which is the Great Snake Variation. I'm not sure why it's called the Great Snake Variation. However, we get the standard setup: knight f3, bishop to g7, knight c3, blocking this pawn from ever being a target. For example, I don't know. But anyway, we get knight c to fianchetto the bishop like always. So we fianchetto, opponent castles, we castle, pretty basic, d6, d3, bishop d7, bishop d2. Pretty standard compared to similar openings. For example, the first two openings look the exact same. Now onto the next setup. We are playing this one against the... So this is the English opening versus the English defense. No, sorry, this is the Caro-kann defense. The English is when they play b6, which is, I think, the next opening. So we get the Caro, and like I said, anytime this pawn in the middle is threatened, we take. So now we want to blockade the queen pawn instantly, travelling further down the board into our position, becoming a thorn in our position. So we get knight to c3. Knight to c6. Not threatening the pawn, but you know, adding an attacker to the pawn. So we play g3, f3, going for the fianchetto, knight to f6, and then we fianchetto the bishop. We get bishop f5, staring down this long diagonal. So we play castles, and then knight to c3, trying to slowly remove any tension in the middle of the board. My arrows are everywhere. So basically it would go rook here, I'm not sure, then bishop here, then we could play this move. Because, oh sorry, we couldn't, we'd have to move the knight. Oh yes, that's right, this is the variation where the knight goes to d2. So the knight comes to d2 in this variation, then we place e4. We can also bring the rook over, but there's plenty of defenders after both knights are staring at here and the bishop. So you get e4, pawn takes, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop takes. Pretty standard. Just trading off a bunch of pieces in the middle. So for example, I'll show you what it would look like. If you don't put your bishop on d7, sorry, that is. So let's say, for example, we put our bishop here, then the opponent plays something stupid like this. I don't know. Let's just say we play this move instead of bishop d2. So opponent plays, let's say a6, sorry. Here, opponent plays here. We'll take with the knight. You should always take with the knight first, to be fair, because if the opponent takes with the bishop, then you can take with the bishop and end up with the bishop still. It's always best to trade the fianchettoed bishop last, because this is also going to be a resource to defense in the future once you move the rook away. So if the rook and the queen and if both rooks and the queen were off the back rank, this also stops any back rank checkmates. So on to the next opening. We are going to look at the English defense. Now, this is the one of the better openings for black, even though they're not grabbing center space. So we're going to go e3 in this opening. So once the opponent is going for the English defense, we want to go with e3. Then we're going to go d4 and claim the big white center, because the fianchetto will become not weak in this position. Well, it will. The fianchetto will eventually become weak in this position, and so will the king. So against the immediate b6, knight f3 is always good to prevent the pawn from becoming weak, but always bring the bishop out to d3, sorry. Now we play pawn to b3, just securing the center pawns, and the opponent strikes in the center. Just play bishop to b2. Bringing out this pawn in the first place is the fianchetto. Now, if the opponent takes the pawn in the center, then you want to always take back with the pawn, allowing future pawn pushes to c4, c5. But yes, that's the end of this opening here. So now on to the next opening. We get the English opening against the Anglo-Scandinavian defense. So of course, whenever you have tension in the middle, you take the pawn. Queen takes. Now we win a tempo on the queen. Queen goes to a5. Now here we play knight f3, the opponent plays knight f6, and we play d4, securing the center squares, just giving the queen less places to go to, as we own most of the squares in the center now. So we own this square, this square, this square, and this square, meaning the queen only has one retreat square, and we can put our bishop on d2 in the future, threatening the queen. So the opponent's pinning our knight. However, we can move the knight. Sorry, the opponent's not pinning our knight, they're trying to pin the knight. So we can move the knight before it gets pinned. The opponent plays bishop to h5, and then we can put the pawn in the way always having this square to drop back to and this square to drop back to, ultimately nearly trapping the queen. If we play this move, then this move, it's pretty devastational for white, because if they play this, then you win the queen with check. So there's a lot of traps within this line. For example, here's the line for you. Let's just say e6. Because opponent thinks this knight's gonna move, and they think this is the square that they can drop back to. But once we play this move, this is the only square they've got, really, apart from coming down. Well, this actually, yeah, this fully wins the queen. Let me turn on the queen can go fully back. It's the only move the queen has. So, let's say drop all the way back. Patient in English and letting the opponent come to you in the best way possible, but if not, going making sure that you can still follow the attack and so that takes us on to our next opening, which is the Dutch defense against the oh sorry, no it's not, the Dutch would be f5. This is the Myers defense, and against the Myers it's d4, claiming the center. The opponent's pushed a pawn way too far out from the center, and we are simply going to claim this squares, all as ours. All the queen side is our squares. Going for the same setup that we have been playing, and so for example, when in the Myers we get this pawn structure, it could end up having 3 pawns in a row, which in England, where I'm from, looks a bit like traffic lights. So I like to call these the traffic light pawns. However, it's not a problem, as this is still a strangely winning line for white. So once the opponent takes here, just play the move that we've been playing most of the English, just trying to fianchetto the bishop. The opponent's going to take here. Now, don't play bishop back with a tempo, because you lose the pawn in the center. I mean, it's still, you know, the engine can find a crazy line to keep this as a even winning position for white, which is crazy to me after losing 3 pawns on the queen side. However, play knight to d2, and we keep our defender on this pawn. And that is the end of that line. That's, believe it or not, a 0.9 advantage for white. So even though we've lost a pawn, we're a full pawn down. We're not even a pawn down, sorry, because there's 1 pawn missing there and 1 pawn missing there, and then we've got these 2 pawns missing here. So even though it looks like slightly equal, it still gives white a 0.9 advantage, as we can see over on the right here. So that takes us on to our final line, which is the halibut gambit, or halibut gambit. I don't know how you pronounce it. However, when there's tension on the flank pawn, we always in its tracks. Bishop to b7, attacking this pawn in the middle. And now we play knight to c3, defending the pawn. We get knight f6, attacking the pawn. And then we play knight to f3, attacking this pawn. Now, if the opponent takes with the knight, we take back with the knight. Opponent takes with the bishop, then we can take this pawn. And if the opponent plays queen to e7, attacking our knight, sorry, we can play d4, defending the knight. Then the opponent plays pawn to e6, threatening the knight. Sorry, pawn to d6. So we play queen e2. The opponent brings the bishop all the way back. Now we can play knight back with the bishop. And this, believe it or not, is a 1.2 advantage for white. Now, this is the end of the variations. So we have ultimately gone through, I can read them all out to you, the symmetrical version, the reverse Sicilian, the Anglo-Indian, the Anglo-Dutch, the Agincourt defence, the Great Snake variation, the Caro-kann, the English defence, the Anglo-Scandinavian, the Myers defence, and the Halibut gambit. Now, with that all said and done, all but one of these openings is an advantage for white. Sorry everybody, I had a few technical issues to say the least, but I was going through every variation that I've been through, and there is one variation I would like to show you out of the Caro-kann variation of the English that I didn't show you. I was showing you a line that I've preferably wrote down myself. However, like I said, well, I don't know if you got to hear, to be fair, but it is the only line in or out of the entire opening video that I've shown you that is negative 0.01. Sorry, negative 0.1. So that means it's 0.1%, or 0.1 evaluation better for black. So if you do not want to go into a line that is nearly dead drawn, then this is a better option for you. So of course, when we get the tension in the center, we take, this is against the English, this is the English against the Caro-kann, and it's essentially a mirrored format. So we bring the bishop out immediately rather than putting it onto d2 and having a tricky middle game like I've shown. So then we get e6, we play e3, bishop to bishop to d6, just trade the bishops. Then we play bishop d3 ourselves. Opponent castles. Now we can bring out the knight, getting ready to castle. Opponent plays knight to c6. Now we castle, and this is 0.2 better. So pretty much a very similar position, but very different also. This is 0.2 for white. And just to show you how much or how little can be done in this position, Stockfish recommends h6 to maintain the 0.2 advantage for white. I had technical issues again, guys. I can play to you the technical issues. It's actually really annoying. It's sad because I'm just trying to bring good content.
So white is winning here, and then of course the next move after this is.
This is what happened. It happened again, guys. It happened again. I don't know what the problem is, but it happens. Anyway, I was basically explaining that is the most winning line for white in the Caro-kann if you want to play the English against the Caro-kann. And on that note, guys, you take it easy. Stay positive. I'll see you in the next episode, and peace.